I think in some ways the most wonderful music, the most perfect music is the music that you imagine. There's a kind of pleasure in closing my eyes and imagining music and being able to move back and forth in time, to stop it, to freeze it, to stretch it out. The struggle is how to take this music, these sounds inside your head, and to get them as directly out into the world as possible. There's got to be a better way than the traditional way of writing music and playing instruments. My name is Tod Machover, and I'm a composer and a professor at the MIT Media Lab, professor of music and media, and I guess an inventor as well. The human voice is an absolutely remarkable, more than remarkable, it's the great instrument. And I think if you look at the way music developed, clearly one of the reasons for developing instruments was to be able to make music similar to what the voice could make, but which didn't have some of those, quote, limitations. So if you play a string instrument, you don't have to take a breath. There's this whole universe of sounds which are not pitched like the voice. They're noise. They might be noise like the wind, or noise like thunder, or noise like water, for instance. Why can't we call that music, and why can't we integrate that into a wider musical language? And if you do that, well, how do we make and control those sounds? I got involved with technology first quite simply because I was imagining many things in my mind which I hadn't heard before and which were simply very difficult to produce with traditional instruments. There was something magical about programming. This machine, unlike the traditional instruments, actually didn't have any personality. It wasn't predestined to sound a particular way or another way. Programming was a magical way of creating any instrument or any sound environment, or in fact any combination of sounds that you could imagine if you could find a way of describing them. Because I think there is this range of sound and of ways of manipulating sound that's possible now and that is also beautiful, that music needs to be written, and we need to have the instruments to shape it and to manipulate it. And my sense is that we don't have those instruments. So the question is, how do you make the connection between the way we know that human beings can and like to express themselves and this more complex world? And that's where I think we need hyperinstruments or something like that. We worked on a whole series of string instruments called hyperstrings, and maybe my favorite of them is the hypercello. The idea was to use the cello as a window into a whole other set of possibilities for sound and structure and complexity. To do that, there are all kinds of inventions and innovations that have to be made. We had to design sensor strips that actually sent electricity back and forth underneath each string, and it measured how fast the electricity traveled. So when your finger touches a string, it stops the signal. The electricity travels at a different distance. You can measure that so you know where your fingers are. It actually turns out that you can use a circuit like that to measure the amount of electricity your body absorbs from the air, but you can also couple your body to an electric circuit, send electricity through your body, and measure the amount of electricity that's coming from your body out into the air. So that's when I started thinking that the sensor measurement technique that was getting good enough, that we should be able to develop an instrument that would be usable by just somebody who liked music. And that connected with my whole desire to not take for granted that people listen to music the same way as they did 100 or 200 years ago, and that part of our job now is to invent new ways to bring people back to listen and to focus very carefully. So I started making instruments for the public and not just for the people on stage. I think of these instruments not as a dialogue between a human being and a machine, but as technology which becomes integrated in some form that's so natural and becomes so second nature that through your human behavior, in this sense, the desire to communicate through music, you have the ability to expand your intention in many directions. One of the important roles of any person involved in making music these days is to try every way possible to wake people up, to concentrate, to listen carefully.
Quiet, please.
I believe that one of the ways of doing this is to actually encourage people to get their hands in and experiment with touching the music themselves, with making it, with changing it, with modifying it, personalizing it. Just so that you're present and fully aware when you're listening. I decided to make a large-scale project called the Brain Opera. I built basically an orchestra of instruments that were designed so that anybody could play them. Literally, walk in off the street, no instructions. Some of the instruments used the electricity of the body, so you could move your arms, something called a gesture wall. You could control huge masses of sound, kind of like conducting sound. I thought of it kind of like, how would you give somebody who never played an instrument the feeling of what it was like to play an instrument?
Music is a very mysterious thing. Mysterious thing.
And then, after playing with these instruments for about 45 minutes, you went to a performance of the Brain Opera.
Brain opera, brain opera,
We're going to try to look inside our minds and hear what's going on.
You heard a 45-minute piece where about half of it I had composed carefully ahead of time, and about half of it was taken from what the audience had just done in the first room.
No guarantees, but it should be interesting.
By playing with these same instruments, not only were people trying things, but they were also literally getting familiar with them. Sort of enhanced program notes. You were understanding what the piece was made of. And then when you heard it all come together, it was not only something you were familiar with, but hopefully a powerful experience to see these fragments take on meaning. One of the best things about music is that different people of different skill levels can make music together. You know, you can sit down at the piano and have a parent play with a 5-year-old child. Kids are so capable of doing pretty much everything you need to do to make music at very young ages. And what do? We give them extremely fine motor-controlled instruments that they can't express with those instruments what they know very well. Technology is very good at taking account of skills that you already have. We all know how to use our voices. We all know how to touch things. Most of it's not conscious knowledge, but given the right environment, given the right tool, given the right instrument, we can use that information and that skill to control musical instruments. Beat bugs are something that we developed to try to train children to play rhythm. Since there's a little computer inside, when you tap a rhythm, the bug can memorize the rhythm, and it plays it back. There's a little speaker in the front, which allows the sound to come out, and you can also feel the vibration. And there are two wires, which are bend sensors, mounted on the end, kind of like antenna for bugs. And they measure, actually very sensitively, how far you bend them, and they measure independently. And that can be used to measure anything. The beat bugs are not physically difficult to play. Any kid could pick them up and do something with them. But once you started, you could both learn certain musical principles and dive in to start playing beautifully and listening to other people and to making your own music. In many ways, we've tended to exaggerate the differences between, the stars in music and the rest of us. The biggest change that we can make is to take music back as something that we all have in us and that we all are capable of making. And that's something that you can certainly do without technology, but it's something that in a lot of ways I think technology makes even easier and probably has a very major role in the future. Oh, I think definitely when you say childhood and music, for me, what pops in my head is my mom, no question. I mean, she went to Juilliard as a pianist, decided to become a teacher so she wouldn't have to tour. And I think she really always had as part of her mission to think of a way to get children involved with loving music and with making their own music. So we were always making music around the house. I think this made it such that it was something that I really loved from the earliest time. I'm not afraid, my search is over. I'm not afraid, I have found you. I'm not afraid, love is within me. I'm not afraid, Vallis is me. I'm not afraid, my search. But I don't tend to work in blocks of music that, are kind of common currency. I tend to start from scratch and invent everything. And so I think it takes a little longer to get familiar with kind of where to find your bearings in my music. I think in my music, what's interesting is it's like being on a whitewater rafting trip. What you're familiar with is the boat, and all of this complexity around it is getting, hurtled down these tributaries and off cliffs. I think that it may take a little bit of experience to find your boat and to stay in the boat, but I think once you do, the music isn't hard to follow and packs a lot of impact.
Do you like music?
Very much.
Swell. The records are right in the cabinet.
Well, is it okay with you, sir? Sure, kids. Go ahead. Well, thank you.
Pick something groovy, Alex.
I don't sell as many records as Britney Spears. This is true. It definitely, boy, I wish I did. It would make things easier. It really would. I think the paradox is that one of the reasons that Britney Spears sells so much is because it's familiar, and the reason it's familiar is that it's recognizable, and it's recognizable because it gets played so often, and it gets played so often because it's recognized. It's sort of a loop, but I mean, you simply hear it so much. I think any music which you have a chance to hear over and over and over again, you have a chance of getting to know. You write music because you want to reach people directly, and I want to reach them now, and I'm thinking about the music now, and I want to write it now, and I want people to be listening to it now. I don't think I was born a particularly patient person. I mean, I'm not. But that's an area where I've had to have more patience than I expected. I want to write music that has something to say to a connoisseur and to somebody who is both very demanding and very knowledgeable, and also might spend a lot of time with something, and also might come back to my music over and over again. But I also feel that it's missing something if my kids or someone else's kids can't listen to it. You know, my daughters know my operas by heart, and it isn't at all because I taught it to them. It's because it's in the background and it plays, and they don't have any trouble with it at all, and it's very natural for them, and I don't think they're the only two. When you're a composer, you often hear from people, they say, oh, it's such a mystery how you can compose. You know, how do you get those sounds in your head? But if you think about it, we all have a huge amount of sound going on in our minds all the time. I'd love to figure out a way to create an environment or tools or instruments that would help people to make the music in their heads more vivid and to play with it. It's a good next project.
Uh-oh. Well, you did it again.
Gee, what a mess.
So I always imagined an instrument which would be on a kind of pedestal, you know, about in this area in front of one, and would be a kind of undulating blob. So something where I can focus, but which does give a fair amount of, maybe it's about the same degrees of freedom as with the cello. Gee, what a surprise. You could, like a potter's wheel, you could reach in, could push parts of it and depress something about the overall sound structure. You could take the bubbles on the surface would be the individual events, a note or an instrument, and you could take those and pull them and twist them, and you could reach your hand right in the inside and deal with the individual particles and decide how similar or different everything was. This would be the world of sound. And if you were composing, you could literally start with just a little bit of this and literally move it to some shape and then set it in motion. Having something which has a three-dimensional form and then is activated in various ways and maybe coaxed a little bit here and there, kneaded, pushed, touched. Something like this texture blob instrument would be an instrument of the future that would be equally accessible and equally useful to a child, to a novice listener, to a student, to an experienced listener, to a composer. That's the kind of continuum that you have to build to make a musical environment that truly connects people and reaches across the kind of complexity and simplicity that I think is necessary. There's no question that I write music so people enjoy it, and so these messages get across, and so all the thinking that I put into it, and all the instruments, and all of these ideas about sound and about expression, they don't mean anything if it doesn't exist in the music and the music doesn't speak. I think you can have music without technology, but it's a kind of ideal music. Think of Beethoven. Maybe you can never get better than Beethoven, period. Maybe that's always the limit of what humans can do. I think that what one looks at now is a way of communicating, expressing, and understanding the world that we're born into, both to understand it ourselves and to share it with others and to leave a mark for future generations. And that can't be done with the language and instruments of Beethoven. It has to be done with our own materials.